A photo taken at a Thanksgiving dinner in 1908 seemed ordinary until experts zoomed in on one corner of the photo. The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the Hartwell Historical Society as Dr. Sarah Mitchell carefully unwrapped the final box of donated photographs. The musty smell of old paper and time filled the small archive room, where she'd spent the better part of 3 months cataloguing the extensive collection left by the recently deceased Eleanor Whitman, a local historian whose passion for preserving the past had consumed her entire life. Sarah adjusted her reading glasses and pulled out a sepia-toned photograph, its edges slightly yellowed but remarkably well preserved. The image showed a typical American family gathered around a dining table laden with what appeared to be a Thanksgiving feast. The formal poses, elaborate Victorian clothing, and the quality of the photographic technique immediately caught her attention. 1908, Thanksgiving Day, the Morrison family, she read from the handwritten notation on the back. The photograph depicted 13 people arranged around an elegant mahogany table in what appeared to be a grand dining room. The adults wore their finest clothing, the men in dark suits with high collars, the women in long-sleeved dresses with intricate lace details. 3 children sat primly, their hands folded, staring directly into the camera with the serious expressions typical of early 20th century photography. What struck Sarah immediately was the exceptional clarity of the image. The photographer had clearly been skilled, capturing not just the central subjects, but incredible detail in the background. The ornate wallpaper, the crystal glasses catching the light, even the grain of the wooden floor. She could make out the pattern on the china, the delicate embroidery on the tablecloth, and the way the afternoon light streamed through tall windows behind the family. Sarah had been working as a photographic historian for over 15 years, specializing in early American family photography. She'd seen thousands of similar images, but something about this particular photograph held her attention. Perhaps it was the unusual composition. Most family portraits of that era were more formally staged, with subjects arranged in rigid rows. This image had a more natural feel, as if the photographer had captured a genuine moment of family togetherness. She placed the photograph under her magnifying glass and began her standard documentation process. The Morrison family name was familiar. She remembered seeing references to them in other historical documents. They had been prominent landowners in the area, with interests in both farming and the emerging automotive industry. The patriarch, James Morrison, had been known for his progressive views and his support of early women's suffrage movements. As she examined the image more closely, Sarah noticed the incredible attention to detail that the photographer had achieved. The depth of field was remarkable for 1908 technology. She could see books on shelves in the background, the pattern on a rug partially visible beneath the table, and even what appeared to be additional family portraits hanging on the far wall. It was then that her trained eye caught something unusual. In the far right corner of the photograph, barely visible in what should have been the shadowy background of the dining room, there appeared to be another figure. At first glance, she thought it might be a servant, or perhaps another family member who had moved during the long exposure time required for photographs of that era. But as she adjusted the magnifying glass and angled the photograph toward the light, the figure became more distinct. The person appeared to be a young woman, standing partially hidden behind an ornate wooden cabinet. What made this unusual was that the figure seemed to be deliberately concealing herself, pressed against the furniture in a way that suggested she was trying to remain unnoticed. Even more intriguing, her clothing was distinctly different from the formal attire worn by the rest of the family. Simpler, more practical, and several shades lighter than the dark, formal garments of the Morrison family members. Sarah felt the familiar thrill that came with discovering something unexpected in a historical document. She'd built her reputation on noticing details that others missed, on finding the human stories hidden within formal poses and careful compositions. But this discovery felt different, more significant somehow. She carefully photographed the image with her digital camera, making sure to capture the full frame as well as detailed close-ups of the mysterious figure. Then she turned to her computer and began researching everything she could find about the Morrison family and their 1908 Thanksgiving celebration. The historical records painted a picture of a prosperous and well-regarded family. James Morrison had married Catherine Wells in 1885, and they had 5 children together. The family had been active in local politics and social causes, particularly the temperance movement and efforts to improve working conditions in local factories. They owned a large home on Elm Street, the same house, Sarah realized, that now served as the town's historical museum. But as she dug deeper into newspaper archives and city records, Sarah began to notice gaps in the documentation. There were references to household staff, but no detailed records. There were mentions of family guests and extended relatives, but the guest lists for social events seemed incomplete. Most puzzling of all, she found a brief mention in a 1909 newspaper social column that referred to the Morrison family's continued support for local displaced persons, but no explanation of what this support entailed or who these displaced persons might have been. As the afternoon wore on and the rain continued to fall, Sarah found herself returning again and again to the photograph. Each time she examined it, she noticed new details. The way certain family members seemed to be glancing toward the right side of the frame, the subtle tension in some of their expressions, the fact that one of the chairs at the table appeared to have been hastily pushed back, as if someone had recently stood up. By closing time, Sarah had made a decision. This photograph was more than just another historical document. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. And tomorrow, she would begin the investigation that would uncover a story that had been hidden for over a century, a story that would challenge everything the town thought it knew about one of its most prominent families. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm having passed during the night. Sarah arrived at the Historical Society an hour before opening, her mind still consumed by the mysterious figure in the Morrison family photograph. She'd spent most of the evening thinking about what she'd discovered, and her excitement had only grown stronger. She'd contacted her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, a forensic photograph analyst who worked with law enforcement and historical societies to authenticate and enhance old images. Marcus had developed several techniques for extracting details from photographs that weren't visible to the naked eye, using specialized software and high-resolution scanning equipment. "Sarah, you've got that look in your eyes again," Marcus said as he arrived with his equipment cart. At 62, he'd been analyzing photographs for longer than Sarah had been alive, and his expertise had helped solve numerous cold cases and historical mysteries. "What have you found this time?" "Look at this," Sarah said, placing the Morrison photograph under his specialized magnifying equipment. 1908 Thanksgiving dinner. But there's something in the background that doesn't make sense. Marcus adjusted his glasses and leaned over the photograph. His trained eye immediately went to the same corner that had caught Sarah's attention. "Interesting composition for 1908, he murmured. "The photographer was skilled. Look at this depth of field. And yes, I see what you're looking at. That figure is definitely intentionally positioned to be less visible." He began setting up his digital scanning equipment, explaining his process as he worked. "We'll start with a high-resolution scan. 1200 dpi should give us excellent detail. Then I can use enhancement software to adjust contrast and brightness in specific areas without affecting the overall image." As the scanner hummed to life, Sarah shared what she'd learned about the Morrison family. They were well-established, socially conscious, wealthy, but not ostentatious. James Morrison was involved in progressive causes, and his wife Catherine was active in women's charitable organizations. But I found some gaps in the historical record that seem unusual. The scanning process took nearly an hour, but the results were immediately impressive. On Marcus's laptop screen, the photograph appeared with stunning clarity. Every detail was sharp and defined, from the intricate patterns on the wallpaper to the individual threads in the tablecloth. "Now let's see what we can learn about our mysterious guest," Marcus said, using his software to isolate and enhance the right corner of the image. As he adjusted the brightness and contrast, the figure became increasingly clear. "It's definitely a young woman," Sarah observed. "I'd estimate early 20s based on her posture and the way she's positioned. And look at her dress. It's much simpler than what the family is wearing, but it's not a servant's uniform either." Marcus continued his enhancement work, and gradually more details emerged. The young woman's face was partially visible, showing delicate features and what appeared to be dark hair pulled back in a simple style. Her expression was watchful, almost anxious, and she seemed to be focused intently on something outside the frame of the photograph. "There's something else," Marcus said, pointing to an area near the young woman's feet. "Look here. It appears she's standing next to some kind of luggage or traveling case. It's partially hidden by the cabinet, but you can see the corner of what looks like a leather satchel." Sarah felt a chill of excitement. A traveling case suggests she wasn't a permanent member of the household. But why would a guest be hiding during a family portrait? They spent the next 2 hours examining every inch of the photograph with the enhanced imagery. Several other details emerged that they hadn't noticed initially. One of the Morrison children, a boy of perhaps 10 years old, was clearly looking toward the hidden figure, his expression showing what could be curiosity or concern. Additionally, there appeared to be an extra place setting at the table, a chair that was pulled slightly away, as if someone had been seated there but had risen just before the photograph was taken. "Sarah," Marcus said suddenly, "look at the wall behind the family. There's something there, what appears to be another photograph or perhaps a document mounted in a frame." Sarah leaned closer to the screen. In the enhanced image, she could make out what appeared to be a framed document on the wall, partially obscured by the formal family portraits. The document appeared to contain text, but it was too small and distant to read clearly. "Can you enhance that section?" she asked. Marcus worked for several minutes, but the resolution limitations of 1908 photography made it impossible to read the document clearly. However, they could see that it appeared to be official, perhaps a certificate or legal document of some kind. By afternoon, Sarah had developed a plan. She would visit the Morrison house, now the town's historical museum, to examine the actual room where the photograph was taken. She would also research the local newspaper archives more thoroughly, looking for any unusual events or social issues that might have been occurring during the Thanksgiving period of 1908. Her first stop was the museum, where she met with the curator Helen Rodriguez. Helen had been working at the museum for over 20 years and knew the Morrison house better than anyone. "The dining room is remarkably unchanged," Helen explained as they walked through the elegant rooms. "The Morrison family donated the house to the town with the stipulation that the main floors be maintained as they were during the family's residence." Standing in the actual dining room, Sarah could immediately see the exact spot where the photograph had been taken. The ornate cabinet was still there, positioned in the same corner. The windows, the wallpaper, even the wooden floors were original to the Morrison era. "Helen, have you ever heard any stories about the Morrison family hosting guests or displaced persons?" Sarah asked, remembering the newspaper reference she'd found. Helen's expression became thoughtful. "There were always rumors that the Morrisons were involved in helping people in difficult situations. James Morrison was known for his charitable work, and there were stories about the family providing temporary shelter for people in need. But nothing was ever officially documented." As they talked, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. On the wall where the mysterious document had appeared in the photograph, there was now a different frame, a family portrait from a later period. But the wall showed faint marks where another frame had once hung, marks that corresponded exactly to the location of the document in the 1908 photograph. "Helen," Sarah said carefully, "do you know what used to hang in that spot?" There's clearly been another frame there. Helen frowned, studying the wall marks. You know, I've never really thought about it. When I started working here, that portrait was already in place. But now that you mention it, there are some boxes of Morrison family documents in our storage area that we've never fully catalogued. Eleanor Whitman was supposed to help us go through them, but she never got the chance. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of a breakthrough. Would it be possible for me to examine those documents? Of course, Helen replied. In fact, why don't we go look at them right now? As they headed toward the museum's storage area, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something significant, something that would explain not only the identity of the mysterious young woman in the photograph, but perhaps a much larger story about the Morrison family's secret activities during a turbulent period in American history. The museum's storage room was a treasure trove of historical artifacts, but Sarah's attention was immediately drawn to 3 large wooden boxes marked Morrison Family, Personal Documents. Helen pulled on cotton gloves and began carefully removing the contents while Sarah set up her documentation equipment. Eleanor Whitman was meticulous about preservation, Helen explained, but she was also incredibly secretive about some of her research. These boxes came to us after her death, and we haven't had the resources to properly catalogue everything. The first box contained typical family documents, business correspondence, social invitations, household accounts, and personal letters. But Sarah's historian's instincts told her to look for what wasn't typical, what stood out from the normal pattern of a prosperous early 20th century family's paperwork. It was in the second box that they made their first significant discovery. Buried beneath layers of business documents was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, but remarkably well preserved. The cover was embossed with the initials J.M., James Morrison. Sarah carefully opened the journal and began reading. The entries were written in the careful script typical of the era, and they painted a picture of a man deeply concerned with social justice issues. James Morrison hadn't just been a successful businessman. He'd been actively involved in helping people who found themselves in desperate circumstances. "Listen to this," Sarah said, reading aloud from an entry dated November 1908. "Catherine and I have agreed to expand our assistance program. The situation for displaced persons continues to worsen, and we have the resources and moral obligation to help. The authorities may not approve of our methods, but sometimes justice requires action beyond legal channels." Helen leaned closer as Sarah continued reading. "Today we welcomed Anna, a young woman whose situation exemplifies the challenges faced by those seeking refuge. Her English is improving daily, and Catherine believes she will adapt well to American society. We must be careful, however. The anti-immigration sentiment in town has grown stronger, and there are those who would see our efforts as unpatriotic." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Anna," she repeated. "That could be our mysterious figure." They continued through the journal entries, finding numerous references to guests and displaced persons whom the Morrison family had helped. The entries revealed a sophisticated network of assistance that included not just temporary shelter, but help with employment, legal documentation, and integration into American society. An entry from December 1908 provided even more detail. "Anna has proven herself invaluable in helping with our newer arrivals. Her own experience and natural empathy make her an excellent advocate for others in similar situations. She has requested to help with the Thanksgiving documentation for our records, a task that requires both discretion and courage." "Documentation," Sarah mused. "What kind of documentation would require discretion and courage?" The answer came in the form of another leather portfolio they found in the third box. Inside were dozens of handwritten testimonials, each one telling a story of hardship, persecution, and eventual salvation through the Morrison family's assistance network. The testimonials were written in multiple languages, though most had been translated into English, presumably by someone fluent in the original languages. One testimonial, written in heavily accented English, caught Sarah's immediate attention. "My name is Anna Kozlov, and I write this account of my journey to document the kindness of the Morrison family for others who may need such assistance. I arrived in America in September 1908, fleeing circumstances in my homeland that threatened my safety and that of others. The Morrison family provided not only shelter, but hope for a future I had thought impossible." Sarah and Helen exchanged glances. "Anna Kozlov," Sarah said. "She's real. She was actually there." The testimonial continued. "Mrs. Catherine Morrison has taught me English and helped me understand American customs. Mr. James Morrison has used his business connections to secure employment for me with a family in Boston, where I will begin a new life in January 1909. I am grateful beyond words, and I hope that this record will help others understand the true character of this remarkable family." But it was the final paragraph that provided the most compelling evidence. "I was present during their Thanksgiving celebration of 1908, though I remained apart from the family portrait as Mr. Morrison felt it would be safer for all concerned if my presence was not officially documented. However, I wished to witness this American tradition that represents so much of what I hope to achieve in my new homeland." Sarah felt a chill of excitement. She deliberately positioned herself where she could observe but not be prominently featured in the photograph. It wasn't hiding, it was discretion. Helen pulled out another document, a newspaper clipping from January 1909. The headline read, "Local Family Assists Immigration Bureau with Refugee Documentation." The article praised the Morrison family's cooperation with federal authorities in helping to process and integrate displaced persons. But Sarah noticed that the details were vague and the tone somewhat defensive. "Look at this," Helen said, pointing to a smaller clipping from the same period. "Anti-immigration rally planned for Hartwell." And the article described growing tensions in the community regarding the number of foreign-born individuals seeking residence in the area. Sarah began to understand the full picture. The Morrison family hadn't just been wealthy philanthropists. They had been running a sophisticated assistance network for refugees and immigrants during a period of significant anti-immigration sentiment. The discretion evident in the photograph wasn't about hiding Anna's presence, but about protecting both her and the family from potential backlash. A final document provided the last piece of the puzzle. It was a letter from the U.S. Immigration Bureau, dated February 1909, officially commending James Morrison for his patriotic service in assisting displaced persons in their transition to productive American citizenship. The letter specifically mentioned the success of the documentation project undertaken during the autumn of 1908. "The documentation project," Sarah said. "Anna wasn't just a refugee they were helping. She was helping them help others. She was documenting the stories of other displaced persons, creating the testimonials we found." Helen nodded slowly. "And the mysterious document on the wall in the photograph. It could have been related to this project. Maybe a certificate of recognition or perhaps documentation related to their work with the Immigration Bureau." Sarah carefully photographed all the documents they'd discovered, her mind already forming the narrative of what they'd uncovered. The Morrison family had been far more than successful business owners. They had been early advocates for immigrant rights, operating a sophisticated assistance network during one of the most challenging periods for immigration in American history. But as she packed up her equipment, Sarah realized that they'd only uncovered part of the story. Anna Kozlov's testimonial mentioned that she was relocating to Boston in January 1909. What had happened to her after that? Had she successfully integrated into American society? And why had Eleanor Whitman been so secretive about this particular aspect of her research into the Morrison family? These questions would drive the next phase of Sarah's investigation, leading her to discoveries that would reveal not just Anna's fate, but the far-reaching impact of the Morrison family's courage and compassion during a pivotal moment in American history. Sarah spent the next week immersed in research, following every lead that might tell her more about Anna Kozlov's life after leaving the Morrison family. Her search began with Boston immigration records from 1909, but she quickly discovered that tracking individual immigrants from that era was far more challenging than she'd anticipated. Record keeping was inconsistent, and many documents had been lost or destroyed over the decades. However, her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching Anna's story, she'd reached out to Dr. Rachel Goldman at Boston University, a specialist in early 20th century immigrant communities. Dr. Goldman had spent years documenting the experiences of Eastern European immigrants in Boston, and she was intrigued by Sarah's discovery. "The name Anna Kozlov sounds familiar," Dr. Goldman said during their phone conversation. "I've been working on a comprehensive database of immigrant family histories, and I believe I may have encountered references to someone with that name. Let me check my records and get back to you." 2 days later, Dr. Goldman called with remarkable news. "Sarah, I found her. Anna Kozlov didn't just disappear into history, she became quite a notable figure in Boston's immigrant advocacy community." What Dr. Goldman had discovered was extraordinary. Anna had indeed moved to Boston in early 1909, where she initially worked as a seamstress while continuing to improve her English. But by 1911, she had become involved with the North American Civic League for Immigrants, an organization dedicated to helping newcomers navigate American society and legal systems. "I have documentation showing that Anna became one of their most effective translators and advocates," Dr. Goldman explained. "She spoke multiple languages and had first-hand experience with the challenges faced by displaced persons. By 1915, she was running her own assistance program, specifically focused on helping immigrant women find employment and safe housing." Dr. Goldman sent Sarah copies of several documents that painted a picture of Anna's remarkable transformation from refugee to advocate. There were newspaper articles from the Boston Globe praising her work, correspondence with government officials regarding immigration policy, and even a photograph from 1918 showing Anna at a naturalization ceremony for new American citizens. But the most significant discovery was a document that directly connected Anna's later work to her experience with the Morrison family. It was a speech Anna had given in 1920 at a conference on immigration reform, and Dr. Goldman had found a transcript in the archives of the North American Civic League. In the speech, Anna spoke about the importance of families like the Morrisons. "There are Americans who understand that our nation's strength comes not from turning away those in need, but from embracing them and helping them become productive citizens. I was privileged to know such a family during my first months in this country, and their example has guided my work ever since." She went on to describe, without naming them directly, the Morrison Family's Assistance Network. This family did more than provide temporary shelter. They created a comprehensive system of support that addressed not just immediate needs, but the long-term challenges of integration. They documented our stories, helped us find employment, and most importantly, they treated us with dignity and respect during our most vulnerable time. Sarah realized that Anna's speech provided crucial context for understanding the Morrison family's photograph. The documentation project mentioned in James Morrison's journal wasn't just about record keeping. It was about preserving the human stories behind immigration, creating a historical record of the challenges and triumphs of people like Anna. Armed with this new information, Sarah decided to visit Eleanor Whitman's house, which was now being prepared for sale by her estate. Eleanor's niece, Margaret Thompson, had agreed to let Sarah examine Eleanor's personal research materials before they were donated to various historical institutions. Eleanor's home study was a historian's dream. Walls lined with filing cabinets, boxes of documents and research materials covering decades of local history work. But Margaret directed Sarah to a particular corner of the room where several boxes were marked Morrison Project Confidential. Aunt Eleanor was very secretive about this research, Margaret explained. She spent years working on it, but never published anything. She said she was waiting for the right time, but I think she was also worried about how some people in town might react to what she'd discovered. The Morrison Project boxes revealed the full extent of Eleanor's research into the family's assistance network. She had traced the stories of dozens of individuals who had been helped by the Morrisons, documenting their later lives and contributions to American society. Anna Kozlov was just one of many success stories, but Eleanor had clearly recognized her as particularly significant. In Eleanor's personal notes, Sarah found the explanation for the historian's secrecy. The Morrison family's work challenges the narrative that many in Hartwell prefer about our town's history. There are still families here whose ancestors were vocal opponents of immigration, and revealing the full extent of the Morrisons' activities might create unnecessary controversy. However, the story deserves to be told, particularly in our current political climate. Eleanor had also solved the mystery of the document that had appeared on the wall in the 1908 photograph. According to her research, it had been a certificate of appreciation from the U.S. Immigration Bureau, specifically recognizing the Morrison family's role in the documentation project. The certificate had been removed from the museum display in the 1950s, during a period when anti-immigration sentiment had again risen in the community. "Where is the certificate now?" Sarah asked Margaret. "Actually, it's here," Margaret replied, leading Sarah to another room. Aunt Eleanor had borrowed it from the museum years ago for her research and never returned it. "I've been meaning to take it back." The certificate was exactly as Eleanor's notes had described, an official recognition of the Morrison family's patriotic service in documenting the experiences and contributions of displaced persons during their transition to American citizenship. It was dated December 1908, just 1 month after the famous photograph had been taken. But Eleanor's most significant discovery was contained in a separate folder marked Anna Kozlov, Later Years. Inside, Sarah found copies of documents showing that Anna had maintained correspondence with the Morrison family well into the 1920s. The letters revealed that she had continued to send other displaced persons to the Morrisons for assistance, and that the network had grown to include other families throughout the region. One letter from Anna to Catherine Morrison, dated 1922, was particularly moving. "Your family's kindness during my darkest hours gave me not just shelter, but purpose. The work I do now in Boston is a direct extension of the compassion you showed me, and I hope that in some small way I am honoring the trust you placed in a frightened young woman who barely spoke your language." As Sarah carefully documented Eleanor's research, she realized that the mysterious figure in the 1908 photograph represented much more than a single individual's story. Anna Kozlov embodied the potential for transformation and contribution that the Morrison family had recognized in all the people they helped. Her presence in that Thanksgiving photograph, discreet but determined, symbolized both the vulnerability and the strength of people seeking refuge and opportunity in America. The final document in Eleanor's collection provided one last surprise. It was a copy of Anna's obituary from the Boston Globe, dated 1963. Anna had lived to be 84 years old, and her obituary listed her numerous contributions to immigrant rights advocacy, including her role in founding several assistance organizations and her work with government agencies to improve immigration policies. But the most touching detail was in the final paragraph. Ms. Kozlov often spoke of her gratitude to an unnamed American family who had helped her during her first months in the United States. She frequently said that their example of compassion and courage had shaped her entire approach to advocacy work. In accordance with her wishes, donations in her memory should be made to organizations supporting immigrant families in need. Sarah realized that she now possessed not just the solution to the photographic mystery, but a complete story of human courage, compassion, and transformation that spanned more than half a century. The question now was how to share this story in a way that would honor both the Morrison family's legacy and Anna Kozlov's remarkable life. 3 months after discovering the mysterious figure in the 1908 Thanksgiving photograph, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Hartwell Historical Society. The story of Anna Kozlov and the Morrison family's assistance network had captured the imagination of the community, and tonight's presentation would reveal the complete findings of her investigation. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this moment, carefully crafting a presentation that would honor all the people involved while addressing the historical context that had made their story both necessary and controversial. She had invited Dr. Goldman from Boston University to co-present, and they had also arranged for a special guest, Anna Kozlov's great-niece, Elena Martinez, who had traveled from Boston after learning about the discovery of her family's story. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, 3 months ago, I discovered something in a donated photograph that I initially thought was simply an interesting historical detail. What I found instead was a story of courage, compassion, and the fundamental American ideal that we are stronger when we help those in need. She clicked to the first slide, showing the enhanced image of the 1908 Morrison family photograph with Anna's figure clearly visible in the corner. A murmur of recognition went through the audience. Many had seen the image in the local newspaper articles that had been covering Sarah's investigation. "This young woman's name was Anna Kozlov," Sarah continued, "and her presence in this photograph represents one of the most remarkable stories of human resilience and community support in our town's history." Sarah and Dr. Goldman took turns presenting the evidence they had uncovered: the Morrison family journals, Anna's testimonials, the Immigration Bureau recognition, and the documentation of Anna's later advocacy work in Boston. They explained how the Morrison family had operated a sophisticated assistance network during a period of significant anti-immigration sentiment, helping dozens of displaced persons integrate into American society. Elena Martinez then took the stage to share her family's perspective on Anna's story. "My great-aunt Anna rarely spoke about her early years in America," Elena said. "But when she did, she always emphasized how one family's kindness had changed the entire trajectory of her life. She never told us their names, but she said they had shown her what America could be at its best, a place where people help each other regardless of background or circumstance." Elena shared photographs and documents from Anna's later life, showing her work with immigrant families, her involvement in advocacy organizations, and her recognition by various government agencies for her contributions to American society. The audience could see how the frightened young woman hiding in the corner of the 1908 photograph had evolved into a confident, accomplished advocate for others in similar situations. "Anna's transformation began in this room," Elena said, gesturing toward the museum's dining room where the original photograph had been taken, but it continued throughout her life as she helped hundreds of other families find their place in America. Dr. Goldman then presented the broader historical context, explaining how the Morrison family's work represented one of many similar efforts throughout the country during a challenging period in American immigration history. "What makes the Morrison story particularly remarkable," she said, "is the comprehensive nature of their assistance and the lasting impact it had on the people they helped." Sarah concluded the presentation by addressing some of the questions that had emerged during the investigation. We found evidence that Eleanor Whitman had been hesitant to publish this story because she worried about how it might be received in our community, but I believe she was wrong to be concerned. This story represents the very best of American values: the willingness to help those in need, the recognition that diversity strengthens our community, and the understanding that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage. She clicked to a final slide showing a contemporary photograph of the Morrison house's dining room, with the Immigration Bureau certificate restored to its original position on the wall. The Morrison family's courage and Anna Kozlov's resilience remind us that the challenges faced by displaced persons aren't abstract historical issues. They're human stories of people seeking safety, opportunity, and the chance to contribute to their new communities. The audience's response was overwhelmingly positive. During the question period, several community members shared their own family stories of immigration and the assistance they had received from neighbors and local organizations. The presentation had clearly struck a chord, connecting historical events to contemporary experiences in ways that made the past feel immediate and relevant. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Elena Martinez revealed a final piece of Anna's story. "My great-aunt Anna left instructions that if anyone ever discovered the identity of the family who had helped her, we should make a donation in their honor to continue their work. With the help of the Historical Society, we've established the Morrison Kozlov Fund to provide assistance to immigrant families in our region." 6 months later, Sarah published her findings in the Journal of American Immigration History, and the story was picked up by national media outlets interested in the human dimensions of historical immigration issues. The Morrison House Museum experienced a significant increase in visitors, many of whom came specifically to see the dining room where Anna had stood during that 1908 Thanksgiving celebration. But for Sarah, the most satisfying outcome was more personal. The investigation had reminded her why she had become a historian in the first place, not just to catalogue the past, but to understand how historical events connected to contemporary human experiences. The mysterious figure in the photograph had led her to a story that was both historically significant and deeply relevant to current discussions about immigration, community support, and American values. Eleanor Whitman's concerns about community reaction had proven unfounded. Instead of controversy, the story had generated conversations about how local communities could better support newcomers, and several other historical societies had reached out to ask for help in researching similar assistance networks in their own areas. Anna Kozlov's presence in that 1908 photograph had been discreet but not hidden, careful but not fearful. She had represented the hope that America could be a place where people from different backgrounds could come together, support each other, and build stronger communities. More than a century later, her story continued to inspire people who believed in those same ideals. The final validation of Sarah's work came in a letter from the Smithsonian Institution, inviting her to contribute the Morrison family story to a national exhibition on immigration and community support in early 20th century America. The mysterious figure who had caught her attention in a dusty archive room had led to a discovery that would now be shared with visitors from around the world. As Sarah prepared the materials for the Smithsonian exhibition, she reflected on how a single photograph could contain so many layers of human story. The Morrison family's formal Thanksgiving pose had captured not just a moment in time, but a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of community support, and the potential for transformation that exists when people are willing to help each other across differences of background and circumstance. Anna Kozlov's story had been waiting more than a century to be told in full. Thanks to one historian's careful attention to detail and the preserved documents of people who understood the importance of recording human experiences, that story could now inspire new generations to recognize the extraordinary potential that lies within ordinary acts of kindness and courage.